I have to admit, I've always had kind of a bit of a soft spot in my heart for the Buffalo Bills. Maybe just a little bit of a soft spot because as a kid, I remember seeing this team go to four straight Super Bowls and losing them all. And in particular, that first loss, Super Bowl 25, that heartbreaker to the Giants. And when Scott Norwood missed that field goal at the end of the game. And now I've seen the Buffalo Bills for the past decade and a half really struggle, really fail to get their footing and just kind of toil in mediocrity ever since the 99 season. And as it's called, the Music City Miracle, that I always more affectionately refer to as, for Bills fans, the Nashville Nightmare. And 2013 was another surely disappointing season for the Buffalo Bills organization and their fan base. And, I'll say this. Yes, it's been 14, 15 years since you made the playoffs, but I saw some signs of encouraging things to come from the Bills in 2013. And even with this offseason, I know you have the death of Ralph Wilson. Now you have concern about the potentially new ownership group and whether or not a new ownership group is going to keep the team in Buffalo or try to move them to Toronto in the case of John Bon Jovi, Stairway to Heaven, whatever the hell you want to call him. And, there's concern about this and that, but I do think there's reason for some optimism. And while the Buffalo Bills aren't all the way there yet, I do expect to see some continued growth and improvement out of this team in the season to come. Now, in the offseason, the Bills made some moves, but nothing of any significance until the draft. I mean, they brought in Brandon Spikes. They traded a late round pick to bring in Mike Williams from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They traded a mid round pick to bring in Bryce Brown from the Philadelphia Eagles. But their most notable splash, their biggest move, had to be moving up from pick 9 to pick number 4 to get the right to trade, or excuse me, to draft Sammy Watkins out of Clemson. They felt last year they drafted their franchise quarterback in E.J. Manuel. This year they needed to find that number one weapon. They needed to find that explosive difference maker on the outside, and that's what they envisioned Sammy Watkins to be. So that's why they didn't feel too bad with the additions of Sammy Watkins and Mike Williams, with going ahead and trading Stevie Johnson to the San Francisco 49ers. The big loss, I think, for the Buffalo Bills came on the defensive side of the ball, letting Jairus Byrd leave in free agency and go to the New Orleans Saints. But not a lot of losses. And like I said, in the case of Stevie Johnson, I don't think it's that bad of a loss at all. And even with Jairus Byrd, he was a good safety, a very good safety, but I don't think it's a crippling loss to defense that I think is a little bit on the underrated side. Now, heading into 2014, what are some of the strengths of this team? I said, thinks first and foremost, it's got to be the running game. I mean, you're looking at a team with Fred Jackson and C.J. Spiller, and you maybe want to throw Bryce Brown into the mix. This is a team that has the talent at running back to be able to run the ball on a consistent basis. That should be a big part of their identity as a team again in 2014 under head coach Doug Marrone. Now I have some concerns about Doug Marrone's complete inability, I think, to effectively utilize C.J. Spiller and all of his skill sets. C.J. Spiller is not a between-the-tackles runner 100% of the time, Doug Marrone. It's time to find out how to get the ball to him in space, how to create some openings, do some different things with him in the running game. But with that said, the Bills still have a lot of talent at running back. It should have a strong, strong running game that is the identity of their offense in the season to come. I do like their wide receivers. Second-round pick last year, Robert Woods, a guy, if he could stay healthy, I think he has all the tools to at least be a number 2 wide receiver in the league. Sammy Watkins, a young, explosive playmaker. You bring in Mike Williams, a bigger, more physical guy. I like their 1, 2, 3 at wide receiver, and I think this is going to be a nice receiving core for E.J. Manuel to work with in that Bills passing game in this upcoming season. And then I look at defensively. I think the Bills have a very underrated front seven. Now, sure, it didn't help losing Kiko Alonso, last year's Defensive Rookie of the Year, to a knee injury for the season, but you've got Mario Williams, you've got a resurgent, I guess you would say, Jerry Hughes. You bring in a guy like a Brandon Spikes. This is a front seven that I think can do some damage and help potentially make this Bills defense a top 10 unit in the league as soon as this season. Now, in terms of question marks, the first and most significant question mark is E.J. Manuel. Can he stay healthy? Is he going to justify the fact that the Bills took him in the middle of the first round last season? There's a lot of questions, a lot of pressure on EJ Manuel. It'll be interesting to see how he answers those questions or fails to answer those questions in the season to come. I think the offensive line is a bit of a concern too. Cordy Glenn, what's going to happen with him all season long? Is this offensive line going to be able to protect EJ Manuel? Because again, that's going to be very important for a guy that had a couple of knee injuries last season. That's not something you want to see out of a quarterback. Offensive line's got to protect him as much as they can, minimize their hits. I think the secondary is a little bit of a question too. Sure, you've still got guys like Leotis McKelvin and Stephen Gilmore at corner, but they did lose Jairus Byrd at safety, and he was the best player in their secondary. So it'll be interesting to see how maybe Williams in the secondary compensates for that or makes up for that loss. But that's going to be a bit of a question area on defense too. I think if there is a question mark on that Bills defense, it probably is in the secondary at this point in time. Now, looking ahead to their schedule in 2014, since they're playing in the East, they get the AFC West, the NFC North, and then their AFC conference games, they've got Houston and Cleveland. So not an incredibly, terribly rough or brutal schedule at all. But I think there are some key things to watch that will determine success or failure for the Bills in the season to come. First and foremost, EJ Manuel's got to stay healthy. And once he stays healthy, he's got to be able to play better than he did last year. He occasionally showed some flashes, but then he showed some very bad habits and patterns that should be concerning. He's got to play better. He's got to play like a first-round pick as a starting quarterback. He's got to play like the future face of the Bills franchise. They really need Sammy Watkins to become that number one weapon. They need Robert Woods to stay healthy. They need Mike Williams to get his, frankly, head out of his ass and play like the talented wide receiver that he's shown he could be in the past in Tampa Bay. They really need the front seven on defense to dominate and impose their will, both in the running game and by generating a pass rush on opposing offenses. If the Bills can get some of those things, I would expect this to be a surprisingly successful season for the team. I've seen some people sit there and say that they think this team could be a playoff team in 2014, and I'm not convinced yet. I think they're still a year away, but I don't think they're that far away. I know that's frustrating Bills fans, the thought of the Bills going yet another season without making the playoffs, but think about when they finally do, and it'll happen at some point in time. Just sheer dumb luck it will happen, if nothing else. How much more gratifying and rewarding it will be, and how much more you will appreciate it when they finally do. I think the Bills will probably go like 8-8 this year and finish second in the AFC East. And again, if they do that, that's going to be some marked improvement from 2013, and it's going to set themselves up very nicely for potentially really getting serious about making a run at the playoffs in 2015.